Let's shift gears a bit. We have all been talking about data for years now. But if you're being honest, most teams still struggle with the same thing. There's no shortage of dashboards, reports, or metrics. The real challenge is knowing what to actually do with it. So that's where predictive analytics starts to make a real difference. Instead of looking back and explaining what happened, it helps you look ahead and gives you a sense of direction, which customers are likely to convert, where you might see drop offs, and what's worth prioritizing right now. It brings a level of clarity that makes decision making faster and a lot more confident. And that's important because speed and confidence are what separate teams that experiment from teams that actually scale impact. So, this next session is really about making that shift practical. We are moving into the first panel discussion: predictive analytics in practice, from data overload to confident decisions. And moderating the conversation is Nivedita Chopra, a seasoned business intelligence consultant at Britney Interactive with 10 plus years of experience transforming complex data into intelligent, scalable solutions that drive strategic decisions across healthcare, marketing, and financial domains. Over to you, Nivedita.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. A very warm welcome to all of you for the sixth edition of Marketing Refocus, which is actually shaping the future of marketing in today's world. Hi, I'm Nivedita Chopra, working as a lead data analyst with Gravity, and right now we are going to talk about the new lifeline of business, that is data. As we all know, we have been working with massive amounts of data, and that data is coming from every interaction, every channel, every customer journey touchpoint, be it social media, marketing channels, etc. And the biggest irony I see in the market today is that organizations often miss this greatest opportunity that data has to offer because tapping it requires some real time data evaluations. Expectations have evolved, data is no longer treated as a historical record. Rather, it is now used dynamically to guide decisions, personalize experiences, optimize operations, and respond in real time. And to help us pursue with this vital opportunity, we now turn to analytics and how it is evolving from understanding what happened to shaping what happens in future. To explore this shift with me, let me introduce our speakers for the day. Joining us today are two globally renowned Adobe Marketer champions who bring extensive expertise in predictive analytics, marketing automation, and modern demand generation strategies. First of all, we have Britney Young, Senior Technical Product Manager at Amazon Web Services. She's an experienced B2B marketer, author, speaker, and marketer certified. Deep expertise in demand generation, strategy, customer journey optimizations, and marketing and automation across both large and growing organizations. We welcome you, Britney. Happy to have you here.
Thank you.
Alongside her is Lauren McCormack, Lead Strategist for the B2B Experience Platform at Kaiser Permanente. She's a revenue-focused MarTech leader, a 7-time marketer certified expert. She's led data-driven transformation initiatives across organizations like Neo4j and SnapLogic, and has spoken at leading industry events including Adobe Summit and DG Marathon. We are thrilled to have you both here. We welcome you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, Lauren, Britney, analytics today feels very different from how it used to be. It is influencing decisions much earlier rather than just reporting outcomes. For example, marketing analysts use sentiment analysis across social media platforms to gauge their audience's behavior. This means to optimize a large-scale processes, decisions must be taken in real time, right at the moment for each and every interaction. So, Lauren, from your perspective, I just wanted to understand how has data analytics evolved over time and what impact is that having on modern marketing today? Over to you, Lauren.
Great question. Yeah, absolutely. So I have been in the strategy and analysis space for the better part of a couple decades. I won't tell you how many years because it tends to age me, but I remember back in the day pretty well still. And in the early days of CRM and marketing automation, we were super interested in engagement metrics like opens and clicks. And we thought that was pretty impressive influence. You know, we were excited to show evidence of life and a pulse on the other end of our campaigns, right? And that sort of evolved into a bit of a so what question. So they opened the email, so they clicked the link, so they viewed the page. So what? What does that tell us? And that pivoted a bit into marketers needing a seat at the revenue table to justify the costs of the platforms that we were going to procurement to requests, you know, and to see the return of the ad spend that we were putting out into the ether. We needed to be able to more confidently lean into influence as part of attribution. So we had to start to be able to speak, as our friend Jessica Cow likes to say, our geek speak needed translation to the C-suite. So we had to start to be able to take analytics into a revenue-centric model where we could talk about how our influence was turning into measurable pipeline and predictable business outcomes. So we started to have to really become full funnel revenue marketers that thought about how our pieces of the puzzle were swimming upstream to turn into good conversations, actual opportunities, and closed won business. And we needed to have an understanding and a partnership with sales so that we could know the propensity of those leads to close, so that we could optimize for quality, and so that we could really have a seat at the revenue table. So it's now gotten to the point where if we're confident enough to be able to talk to how our activities influence revenue, the true pivot and the kind of marketing power move from a revenue operations perspective is to say, okay, well, if certain metrics are steady over time, like the percentage likelihood of sales to close a deal once it's in their hands, what can you do from a predictive standpoint if I give you an extra $500,000? Where are you going to put that money, and how much business should we anticipate it's going to bring in? So we've gone from our cute opens and we've come a long way to have a seat at the predictive revenue analytics table.
Yeah, I think I absolutely agree to you, and also it helps the leadership team to actually walk in the right direction, and it helps with the profits. It helps with incurring less losses and moving in the right direction. Yeah, I think that's a great perspective, Lauren. What we are seeing is a shift from reporting to decision intelligence. Analytics is now embedded into how teams plan, execute, and optimize in real time. So, Brittany, building onto that, one thing I often notice is that teams use terms like descriptive and predictive analytics, but their understanding, I think, varies quite a bit in practice. So, how would you explain what descriptive and predictive analytics actually mean in simple, practical terms? And if you could provide one use case for each of these scenarios, I think that would be a great addition to the audience.
Yeah, I think descriptive is really looking at the past events, whereas predictive is helping you look at a glimpse in the future. And I think both approaches are needed. And I would say the reason why is you need to understand what has happened in the past in order to help you make better decisions in the future. I like to compare it a lot to the analogy of your rear view mirror versus your windshield. So the descriptive analytics really is that rear view mirror. You're kind of looking, understanding what happened in the past, whereas predictive, you're that windshield ahead of you. You kind of know what has happened in the past, but you're moving forward with that guidance. Maybe you have, almost like the descriptive part is that GPS guidance in a way that's helping inform the predictive analytics. I would say one good use case with that is with lead scoring. I know a lot of times you'll come up with a lead score based on things like it's someone who attended a webinar or filled out a form or visited a certain page on your website. But you might find from predictive analytics that there are other use cases that are outside of like those predefined rules that of how you think you should score, and being able to take advantage of that by listening to those other signals beyond just what you've described. I think that's one use case that could help you really better inform your lead scoring strategy.
Okay, nice. I think that's really helpful. It actually simplifies a lot of things. And I remember a very famous quote that you cannot build on the future till you know the history of things. So I
That's
think
right.
descriptive is actually required for any of us to move forward in the predictive analytics direction. Thank you. So taking that forward, Britney, predictive capability also seems to come back to the quality of data, because the models, the ML models, the NLP, whatever is in use, it is actually based on historical data. So how important are data quality and data unification when it comes to enabling predictive analytics effectively?
I would say, since predictive analytics is using what happened in the past to help predict what's going to happen in the future, it is key to accurate predictions. One example I think of is, let's say you have a form on your website and it's being attacked by bots. It in your data, as far as how many leads are creative, it'll look like things are really good. You got 1,000 leads this month. And if you're not actually looking at the quality of that data and using that to inform a predictive model, you may be thinking, okay, well, at this rate, next month we're going to, forecast another 1,000 leads or whatever. Your model will start being based on this bad data. And so I think that data quality is really key. I would say the other part is with unification, that's really going to create the complete view for you across systems and channels and any of those customer interactions. And I think together, both of those really help you identify like meaningful patterns for your models and not just the noise.
It's such a great point, and I think about not just the intake, but then also the curation of the identity resolution and the master data management. And I think about, in the ecosystem, if you were to have 5 or 6 different versions of a singular person, one of which resulted in a closed won contract that was multi-million dollars in scope and size, but you're tracking revenue attribution and behavior against somebody that's an unengaged lead because you haven't resolved the identity of 2 records that are the same person, or you haven't attached the right people to the contract to understand who's influencing the deal. You just don't have the right picture from the rearview mirror, as Britney would say.
I think in today's world, I think a lot of data engineering is actually going into improving the data quality, cleaning all the data, and unifying the data from multiple platforms. Many tools are working into the direction. Yeah. I think that's a really strong point from both of you, especially around how foundational data really is. Lauren, one question from your side: when organizations try to move beyond disruptive reporting, it sounds simple in theory, but in practice, we always see there are hurdles coming up. From your experience, what are some of the key barriers that teams face, and how can they make that shift easier?
That's such a good question. I think it's unusual in an org for someone to have an appetite to swim outside of their lane. I think in most corporate cultures, that is disruptive and can be met with some confusion and some contention. But the only way that this sort of revenue-centric predictive analysis can happen is in tandem and partnership with sales and marketing, probably IT. Perhaps if you have a data science team, maybe even a security team, you're going to need, and if you want a full funnel view, you're thinking about your services org, you're thinking about land and expand, renewal and retention, churn prevention. This thing sprawls if you want to make it comprehensive. And for some marketers, that's a leap outside of their department, outside of their org chart. They have to go potentially to SVP, C-suite board level conversations with leadership advocacy, with support. They have to build a coalition. It's really operational change management more than it is, dashboards in Claude Code or Power BI or Tableau or anything like that. Like, it starts with organizational change management and people, and the narrative really has to be customized to each of those audiences. So when you're pitching this vision around transparency and predictive analysis, I had a wise colleague once that described it like an exercise in turning over rocks. And sometimes when you flip those rocks over, you find stuff you wouldn't rather see. I mean, if you think about the value prop of predictive analysis, it's going to show you where you're doing really well. It's going to show you the places where you're wasting money. It's going to show you the places that are languishing and are wasting opportunity. And sometimes that's an uncomfortable truth. So you have to have a lot of courage and confidence and alignment to maintain a professional curiosity with a spirit of change, being a good thing, right? So there's a certain chemistry, a certain synergy, and a kind of star stuff that you need to foster, and a certain crew you're going to need to bring to the table. And I would definitely emphasize the turning over of the rocks is best done in private before it's done in public, for the sake of all involved. Like, don't book with the board before you sit down and have some time to optimize the programs that you're going to report on and socialize.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. Britney, do you want to add on to this?
Yeah, one perspective I had to add to that is, in addition to what you said, Lauren, about kind of like herding the cats and getting everyone on board, one barrier I see too is, like, even once you get them all on board, a lot of times the data is fragmented and siloed in so many places, and like the definitions of what you may call a lead versus what they call a lead, it gets very messy. So I think that's another big barrier, is just all of this fragmented, siloed data, and how do we reconcile it, and how do we come to an agreement even of, like, what is the source of truth, who owns what. That's another big barrier, I think, when it comes to moving to that next level with predictive analytics.
Right. I think that's a very real challenge and something many teams can relate to. In addition to that, I also think that it plays out in real use cases. So not doing so also incurs a severe opportunity cost, and more importantly, puts the organization's competitive stronghold in jeopardy, because companies cannot move in the right direction, and there are a lot of competitors who are working in that direction, and they are at a very fast pace as compared to the other companies. Yep.
Very true.
And looking up from that, a lot of teams are also started transitioning from traditional reporting to like modern approaches. From your perspective, how does this transition actually looks like in practice?
I can field that one. So modernization is a word that gets kicked around a lot. And I think when you want to step into this arena, benchmarking against where you're at, instead of trying to leapfrog into predictive analytics at scale across your entire portfolio, you have to kind of make it an iterative process. Set actionable short-term goals with the long-term vision out ahead of you, because as you start to demonstrate the power of predictive analysis, you'll start to get more advocacy, and that advocacy and that alignment are what will make the picture more comprehensive. To Brittany's point, different versions of the truth will exist, and the data will hide in places and pockets where it's not necessarily able to be aggregated easily. You're going to need access, and you're going to need consent. right? You can't
Mhm.
just expect to integrate platforms without people being on board. They're not going to give you access.
Mhm.
So I think the transformation is essential. I think it's important for people to understand the comfort and luxury that comes with the status quo. You're asking for people who've done what they've done for a long time, the same way that they do things, to rethink the way they do
Mhm.
their jobs. And that has to have a really compelling value proposition in it for them to want to completely pivot. And I think the most compelling way over my years in consulting and leadership to tell that story, to make it have potency, is to explain that the answers to the questions that you don't have today are optional. Eventually, it's not going to be optional to answer questions wherever you're at, whether it's return on ad spend, whether it's anticipated, annual revenue from a region, whether it's forecasting what 2029 might look like in an era of transformation and volatility, like really hard questions, right? If you're not being asked hard questions yet, that doesn't mean they're not coming. And when they get to you and you have to answer them, especially in the age that we find ourselves in now, if you can't answer the questions, you're not going to be able to find the answers quickly unless you start to prepare the data, the people, the transformation. That takes work, ostensibly years of work, depending on the size of your org. You need to not enjoy the status quo and the fact that there's a complacency there, and assume that eventually that if you need to figure this out, you'll have the time to, because the process just doesn't work that quickly. So getting an infrastructure established, pace yourself, get quick wins, and benchmark against where you're at today. But know that if you're not being pressed for questions around predictive analytics yet, it's not because it's not what your organization does. It's just because it hasn't gotten to you yet. Brittany, I don't know if there's anything you'd like to add to that.
I couldn't agree more, Lauren. I think it's a shift in mindset, right? Because for all this time, your organization, like you said earlier, you've been doing a certain role, your job, you're in your little team, your little tool, and that's all that you care about. And I think when you're moving into that predictive analytics mindset, it breaks all of that, because now you're creating an entire system that can proactively guide those decisions and be able to, automate actions. And that's going to require breaking down those walls and barriers. You got to fix your data quality, the governance, you got to connect the systems. And I think, that's really what it is. It's a complete shift in how people are used to working.
Yeah. And don't fear the fact that AI tools are going to come into the picture as part of this orchestration and as part of they're a force multiplier here. And if you consider yourself the AI operator, instead of, fearing the fact that you might be displacing yourself by putting in efficiencies and measurement, you're actually leveling yourself up to be more useful and essential in your organization. So if you have hesitations around the change, especially at this point in history, I would urge you to not avoid this tsunami, but to grab a surfboard and hop in the water before it crashes on the shore,
Yeah.
One other thing you said too, with starting small, you don't have to integrate every single system overnight. This isn't something that can be done, even if you wanted to do it, especially at the bigger the organization, you won't be able to do it all overnight. Start with one use case of something you can automate, some system you can connect, and build from there.
Yeah, I think it's interesting when you just think of it like a simple data stitching, like to answer questions around like paid media. You could start there, and you could take your ad platform data, stitch it with your Salesforce or CRM data, stitch it with your Marketo data, and just get curious around how well you can calculate return on ad spend for some of your bigger ticket,
Yeah.
programs in flight, and then stay curious, right? Start
Mhm.
to see how you can expand those interesting questions around performance analytics, and then eventually start to look through your demand funnel to move into revenue predictive analytics. And you'll find that typically leads will move through into MQL, into SAL at a predictive level. Like you can say, okay, today 4 out of 10 MQLs are converting to SALs, and an SAL converts at like a 20% propensity into pipeline, and then of the 20% that convert into open opportunities, 10% of those are closed won, and the average deal size is $5 million. So you can look and say, my leads going in from this channel, based on those percentages along the path, have a propensity to close, X dollars at Y likelihood. Then you start to get more granular. Stop thinking of it like Google as a platform. Start thinking about each campaign. Start thinking about the programs, right? And it just it's like peeling an onion. I hate that phrase, but it's the more you start asking questions, the more useful the tool will become, because eventually you'll get to a point where you can say, okay, I've got a really killer campaign running right now. Sales is loving it. It's going really well. And eventually the board or the C-suite is going to come to you and say, hey, if we give you an extra $1 million in Q4 for this campaign, and of course they top out eventually. They're not exponentially always going to continue to, grow at the rate that they start to grow. But you can, with some semblance of confidence, predict what they can expect from that investment, or if you have to go solicit those investments, instead of it becoming a wild guess, it's rooted in actual math and data, and that makes your case for funding so much stronger.
Yeah. No, I think I definitely, to add on to this, it is also important once the lead is closed, it becomes an opportunity. We also need to track on the churning customers. The customer satisfaction also plays a very big role over here. We can use the predictive models, predictive analytics into predicting which customers can be of risk or churn. And we can also use that knowledge, I think, to cross-sell, to upsell. All that also matters a lot when we are actually looking into this. Yeah. Thank you so much. I think one thing that often gets overlooked is what happens after models are deployed. So, Lauren, Britney, question to both of you: how do feedbacks actually help refine models and improve predictions over time?
Oh my gosh, I think the feedback models are very important. I have one example from a previous company. I'll never forget. We had forms on the website. We were generating X amount of leads per month. Everyone's like, "Yay!" I've always been curious about data and like digging into the details. And I could see we had a 50% drop off basically from, the lead would be created and then 50% of those were being disqualified. So I started asking why. What I learned from just speaking with our sales team is like, oh, well, yeah, these were leads, but they weren't leads for this particular product that form was, set up for. They were people that were interested, but they were interested in another product we offered. And I had asked, so what happens to that? Like when you disqualify, or what are you doing with the lead? They said, well, nothing. And I was like, are you serious? Because this is still business. I get, especially in enterprise, right? Because there's so many silos. Everyone's got their own teams doing their own thing. And so I was actually able to work with our CRM team to create feedback to the team that those leads should be going to, so that we actually were able to improve that team's like lead predictions, because they knew that at least 50% of the leads that were coming from this one form were actually intended for their product, and they were able to use that feedback to help, gauge their forecast for leads. And so again, I still like to think of kind of these driving analogies, and I think of that feedback is almost like GPS. We all use like Google Maps or something when you're going somewhere, and a lot of times that is using past behavior of traffic patterns based on a time of day and certain streets, and that's helping inform well, basically predicting about how long it's going to take you to get from
Yeah.
point A to point B. And so that's just another way I like to think about how that feedback actually informs those future models and predictions for what is likely to happen.
That's so smart. And I think for me, it's similar stories, right? Over the years, even to your driving analogy, I think it's almost like the feedback to me is almost like a physician. It's like diagnostic, right? Because typically, the pieces of feedback you'll get are the clues to something more systemic, right? So I was a first-time VP at a startup, and we were a mobile app company. And one of my first pivots was to bring on a trusted performance media company that I'd partnered with before. And they were doing wonderfully, generating appointments, keeping our BDRs scheduled from 8 to 5 with meetings. And I was like delighted. But I am at heart a platform human, and I don't necessarily like to think of myself as elevated beyond the need to log in and look at the leads granularly by hand, right? So sometimes you don't have to wait for the feedback. You can find the feedback with a little sleuthing. But it started with my BDR saying, some of these people, these leads, we've got great volume, but sometimes they just, when they answer the phone, it's weird. It feels like it might not be a business owner. I'm like, tell me more about that. Well, I mean, this sounds really strange, Lauren, but I think it might have been a kid. And I'm like, and I mean, we were marketing mobile apps for everybody from like mid-sized companies and mom and pops up to the enterprise, right? So I'm like, that's kind of strange, So I go into the data and I start looking. And I see a lot of Gmails, which is not uncommon in, SMB and even sometimes mid-large people don't want to give you their logo up front. But I start digging in a little bit deeper, and I'm like, I'm going to do some ride-alongs. I'm going to do, a couple gong calls, listen in, see what's going on firsthand, get straight to the front lines. Turns out mobile apps are really popular amongst kids. We had a whole bunch of kids that wanted to build. Think about them going to Chili's with their parents and getting the tablets and playing the games on the mobile apps. How to build a mobile app was the search. And we were getting a lot of unqualified noise. So we optimized. Of course, we optimized.
Yeah.
But that feedback loop, cracking that code and cracking it quickly
Yeah.
before there was waste in that campaign for a long extended duration of time was an essential optimization. And once we fixed that, we just upped the quality, as you can imagine, exponentially of the leads that we were going to market and gathering. So, but sometimes you just have to get your hands dirty. Like the feedback is the symptom, but you have to get in there and do the diagnostic testing.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's not pretty. And then you just got to own it and iterate and
Right.
treat the disease instead of mask the symptoms,
Yeah. I think
Love that.
prescriptive is also equally important to the diagnostic piece. So that is why these are the 4 pillars of analytics, be it descriptive, analytics, predictive analytics, diagnostic, and then we have the prescriptive one. Yeah. I think this is a lot to grasp today from both of you. For marketers, I think this shift creates a strong opportunity to work with data more intelligently, improve decision quality, and build stronger customer outcomes over time. Thank you, Britney. Thank you, Lauren, for all sharing this wonderful information. With this, I think we will wrap up this session. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We'll take up some additional questions from the live audiences. Let's see if someone has come up with any questions. We can definitely discuss that.
I think I see one in the chat if it's helpful.
Yeah. So there have been comments around market research. Yeah, please go ahead, Lauren.
Serena J asks, and maybe Brittany, I'll put this one to you for your thoughts first. If marketing leaders could focus on just one predictive metric for future strategy, which one would you choose and why?
Yep.
Oh,
That's a good one. It's a tough one.
That
Just to
is a
pick
good
one, it's like
one.
picking amongst your children. It's not fair.
Huh. Oh, I don't. That is a hard one. I'm trying to think. Which would I pick?
I think I would start with contribution to pipeline, because at least it starts to talk about how you're, as a marketer, moving dollars. Even if you're not necessarily closing them, that might be a problem with the product or pricing. But at least they know it's not the promotion piece, which is so inherently married to marketing in the minds of most board members and investors. So just to be able to say that, that you have predictive attribution and analysis and a line of sight into the return on ad spend, just at least in open deals. Maybe you need training and enablement around sales to help close and win those deals. Maybe you're in a really competitive industry or landscape. Maybe someone's just killing you on pricing. But at the end of the day, if you know that the work that you're doing is making people interested enough to create opportunities, I think that's a major unlock to the power of predictive analytics.
I was definitely thinking about, I would probably start with like close won or close loss, like the close rates, just because I think it is easy to, you could potentially inflate pipeline from for various reasons.
It's debatable sometimes.
Yeah. And so that's why I always get stuck on that number, because that's how I was able to identify that issue. Like I had shared with the story, it's like, I'm looking at, okay, well, why are we, losing all of these leads? Why are they all being disqualified? And so, and what are the ones that are actually closing? I think that, that's probably where I would start.
That's smart. I think at any rate, Serena, Brittany and I both would push you toward a revenue-centric vision of how the juice is worth the squeeze and what marketing's up to when it comes to top-line revenue.
Yeah. So I think that's a great answer. It was a tough question, but you people handled it well. I don't see any further questions coming up from the audience. I think we are good to close on today's session. Thank you for your presence over here. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Over to you, Justin.
That was a really insightful session. Thank you, Britney, Lauren, and Nivedita for breaking that down so clearly. A couple of things really stand out. One is how predictive analytics helps cut through the noise and focus on what actually matters. And second, how it gives the teams the confidence to move faster because decisions are backed by data, not just as instinct. What also came through strongly is that this is not just about advanced models or complex tools. It is about making predictable, usable, actionable, and embedded into everyday decision making. I'm sure this session has given everyone here a more practical view of how to move from data overload to confident, forward-looking decisions. To stay with us, we are just getting into the momentum zone. See you in our next Power Pack discussion.